When you finally obtain the last tile you need to complete a qualifying hand, you may declare a win by calling out and revealing your hand. This is referred to as going out, or alternatively, completing your hand. Remember that a qualifying hand must meet the requirements of at least one yaku. If your hand does not have any yaku, you will not be allowed to go out. You can either obtain the winning tile yourself, or you may obtain it from an opponent, and there's a different call you have to make depending on which is the case. If you are in Tenpai and the tile that you draw from the wall on your turn completes your hand, you may call out Tsumo to declare the win. This is known as going out off the wall. Lay all of your tiles face up on the table so that the other players may admire your work and confirm that the hand is valid. Then your hand must have its point value calculated. This is the part where you get to announce the names of all the yaku your hand satisfies, chanting the incantation, if you will. You'll hear more details about all of that in the scoring and yaku sections later in the video. Once the point value of your hand has been determined, all 3 other players must split that cost amongst themselves as payment to your score. The dealer pays twice as many points as the other players, but if you happen to be the dealer yourself, everyone pays you twice as many points. Here's a tip about going out off the wall. Remember that your hand needs to satisfy at least one yaku in order for you to be able to declare it as a winning hand. Well, if you haven't made any calls yet and your hand is completely closed, then being able to call Tsumo automatically counts as a yaku, and you may declare the win even if there is not a single other yaku in your hand. This is called a closed Tsumo. If you're just learning how to play, it's a good first yaku for you to memorize, because it gives you an easy way to guarantee that your hand will qualify for a win. If you're in Tenpai and the last tile you need to complete your hand is discarded by an opponent, you may call out Ron before the next player draws to steal the tile and declare the win. This can be referred to as going out off an opponent, off a discard, or off the table. The player who discarded your winning tile is said to have discarded into your hand, or dealt into your hand. Note that if your hand is closed, calling Ron does not count as opening it, even though you are technically stealing an opponent's discard. Lay your tiles face up to confirm the win, then announce your hand's yaku and calculate its score. There is no need to physically pick up your opponent's discard in this case. Unlike Tsumo, when you call Ron against an opposing player, that player alone is responsible for paying the entire amount of points your hand is worth. If you are not the dealer, there's no difference in the amount of points that a dealer or non-dealer would pay you. If you are the dealer, anyone would have to pay you more points. If a player wants to call Ron on a discard, they are always given priority over any other player that calls Pon, Chi, or Kan on it, no matter who made their call first. If possible, multiple players are allowed to call Ron on the same discard. Most often, the calling player who is closest to the discarding player in counterclockwise order is given priority. But sometimes, if a rule called double Ron is in effect, both players win, and the discarding player is required to pay each winner the point value of their hand. If all 3 other players call Ron on the same discard, one of 3 things can happen. Under the rule of triple Ron, all 3 players win, and the unfortunate discarding player pays everybody. If triple Ron is not in effect, then in some rules, the next player counterclockwise from the discarder gets priority again. In other rules, no winner can be determined, and the hand ends in a draw. No matter what the rules, though, in all cases of multiple Ron, all calling players are required to reveal their hands to confirm that their calls were valid. Unlike a closed Tsumo, Calling ron by itself does not normally give your hand an automatic yaku, except under very specific circumstances. So if your hand does not currently meet any yaku on its own, and if the discarded tile would not cause your hand to start qualifying for a yaku by virtue of composition, you are not allowed to call ron against an opponent who discards your weight. However, there is another way you can guarantee a yaku for your hand whether you go out by tsumo or ron, and that's by utilizing the reach system. Rيتشي is a rule unique to the Japanese version of Mahjong, and it's what lends the game its alternative name of Rيtchī Mahjong. In English, the word reach is often used in its place, but this is purely for the sake of it being easier to say, as Rītchī is entirely a Japanese word with an unrelated etymology. What the reach rule does is allow you to announce a commitment to the current composition of your hand, and essentially make a bet that you'll be able to complete it. In return, you'll have secured at least one yaku for your hand ahead of time if you do complete it. This action is sometimes referred to as declaring a ready hand. There are a few requirements you must meet before you may ready your hand. You must be in tenpai, you must have at least 1,000 points, and your hand must be completely closed with no open melds. If you satisfy all three of these requirements on your turn, you may declare a ready hand by calling out Rītchī or reach. Choose a tile to discard that leaves your hand in tenpai, and place it sideways in the next spot in your discard pile. Then, a bet of 1,000 points is subtracted from your score. These points are now considered to be on the table. If you're playing with point sticks, place a 1,000 point stick above your discard pile and parallel with it to represent this. The next player to win a hand claims all of the points on the table for their score in addition to the point value of their hand. So if you win the hand after declaring reach, you'll get your deposit back. If another player wins, your deposit is lost to them. Once you declare reach, you are no longer allowed to call tiles for open melds or change your hand's composition in any way. You have committed your hand to its current weights. Also, after declaring reach, you must take the very first opportunity to go out that arises. As soon as you draw one of your weights, you must call tsumo. As soon as an opponent discards one of your weights, you must call ron, whichever comes first. You may choose to pass up a chance to go out during reach, but in doing so you are putting yourself in a disadvantageous state called furiten, which I'll describe in the next section. What isn't a choice, however, is that any tiles you draw on subsequent turns that do not immediately complete your hand, you must discard. This obligation prevents you from holding on to new tiles that could have been used to increase the value of your hand or to give you a more likely weight. So you need to make sure your hand is really, really ready before you commit to a reach. Furthermore, there's an additional risk in that if you have the misfortune of drawing not your weight but one of your opponent's weights during reach, you have no choice but to discard it, with no way to avoid dealing into their hand. There is an added bonus in store for a player who goes out after declaring reach. That player may take the bottom tile out from underneath each face-up Dora indicator in the dead wall, including con Dora indicators, and flip it face up to serve as an additional Dora indicator. If you have any copies of the tile it indicates in your winning hand, they all become Dora as well before your hand score is calculated. They are called reverse Dora, or ura Dora, which literally means the Dora on the reverse side. And the nice thing about this rule is, only a player who has declared reach is allowed to take advantage of the ura Dora. So if you declare reach and another player who didn't declare reach wins the hand instead, they do not get to flip the ura Dora indicators. They are solely your bonus for overcoming the risks associated with reach. Although you are not allowed to change the composition of your hand after declaring reach, If you enter reach with a triplet as one of your melds, and you draw the fourth copy of that tile during your reach, you may be allowed to declare con with that tile instead of discarding it, and turn the triplet into a quad. The procedure is identical to the formation of any other closed quad. Set the tiles aside, draw from the dead wall, and flip up the next Dora indicator. If the tile you draw from the dead wall does not complete your hand or another quad, you must discard it. Then your reach continues as normal. However, you must remember that you are only allowed to do this if creating the closed quad has absolutely no effect on your hand's weights or its other melds. As a general rule of thumb, it is always safe to turn a triplet of honor tiles into a quad during reach, because there is no other way those tiles can be used. But if you have a triplet of number tiles, if there is any way at all for its members to be considered part of a sequence, part of a pair, or in a weight for either, you may not turn it into a quad. Let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. Suppose that this hand is in reach. On the right, the hand has already completed 2 triplets of honor tiles and a triplet of number tiles. On the left, the tiles are currently arranged so that it looks like the 2 so triplet is the 4th meld, and the hand is in a pair weight on the 3 so. So what would happen if you were to draw the last remaining 2 so at this point? Well, you would not be allowed to declare con. And the reason for that is there is another way for these tiles to be arranged. If you look at the hand like this, now it has completed 3 melds and a pair, and it's in a 2-sided weight on the 1-4 so to complete this sequence. If you tried to declare con here, all of these 2 so tiles would be forced to act as a quad. Forming a sequence with the 2-3 so would no longer be possible, and the 2-sided weight would vanish. But remember, declaring reach means you have committed to your hand's current composition and weights, and that means you are not allowed to declare any quad that would change either. But over here, the 9 wand tiles are completely separate from this whole mess by virtue of both their suit and their value. They may be turned into a quad safely. And the honor tiles are always safe to quad. This is a rule that you really need to try to keep in mind, because you can be hit with a stiff penalty for breaking it. Remember, if declaring con during reach would cause you to leave tempai, change your weights, or make any possible interpretation of your hand's melds no longer possible, it is not allowed. You are not required to declare reach on the first turn you achieve tenpai. You may hold off for as long as you like if you want to try further improving your hand with a few more draws first. Remember that you are not allowed to change the contents of your hand once you enter reach, so do your best to make sure you are satisfied with your hand before committing to it. It's possible for an opponent to call your first discard immediately after you declare reach. If Ron is called on it, you lose the hand obviously, but you do not lose your bet of 1,000 points, since your declaration of reach was interrupted. If your discard is stolen for an open meld, it is not considered an interruption of your reach, but now you must place the next tile you discard sideways instead. Depending on how insistent your opponents are, you may need to keep doing this over multiple turns until you finally get a sideways discard to stay in your discard pile. But once you do, that's it. You don't need to discard sideways anymore for the rest of the hand. If you've declared reach and the current hand ends without any winner being declared, your 1,000 point bet stays on the table. During the next hand, you'll have to pay another 1,000 points if you want to declare reach again. Remember that whenever there are any points on the table, they will all be claimed by the next player to win a hand. When there are 3 tiles or less remaining in the wall, no player is allowed to begin a reach any longer. There must be enough tiles left in the wall to ensure that a player declaring reach would have at least one more draw in an uninterrupted go-around. Finally, memorize again what the calls for reach, tsumo, and ron look like in Japanese, so you can recognize their options in video games. Some games may not specify whether you can call tsumo or ron. Instead, they will present you with a generic option, agari, which simply means win. Incidentally, when you're playing a video game with background music, very often the music will change into something more intense the first time a player declares reach. Furiten is a status that you can enter under certain circumstances. It's sometimes translated as sacred discard, and it's a tricky rule that can cause you lots of problems if you're not careful. When you are in Furiten, you are not allowed to call ron on any opponent's discards. You may only go out off the wall on your turn. The rule of Furiten basically exists as a measure to prevent you from unfairly targeting a specific player to call ron against. If you keep that in mind, it can help you remember the 3 situations that can put you in Furiten. Anytime you're in Tenpai, whether you've declared reach or not, and there is a tile in your discard pile that could have been used to complete your hand, you are in Furiten. This means, for example, that if you draw one of your weights while in Tenpai, you cannot discard it in the hopes of later going out off an opponent to make them suffer a heavier blow to their score. If you do discard it, you are only allowed to go out if you draw another one of your weights yourself again. This is what Furiten is all about. But unfortunately, the scope of the rule ends up being much larger in practice because it applies to your entire discard pile. And don't forget, your entire discard pile includes tiles that your opponents have called from you for open melds. It's possible that the tile you discard on your very first turn, not knowing you will ever need it, will just happen to become one of your weights when you achieve Tenpai 15 turns later. It makes no difference. You are still in Furiten. In order to get out of Furiten, you must replace some of the contents of your hand so that your weights no longer include any of the tiles in your discard pile. Of course, if you've declared reach, this is no longer possible, and you'll have to remain in Furiten for the rest of the hand. If you've declared reach and you pass up your first chance to call ron against an opponent, you are now in Furiten for the rest of the hand. This prevents you from trying to call ron against a specific opponent during reach. If you're in Tenpai but have not declared reach, and you pass up a chance to call ron against an opponent, you are in temporary Furiten. This Furiten status wears off on your next turn. It also wears off immediately if any player calls an open meld. This means that even if you haven't declared reach, there's still no fair skipping to another player's discard within the same go-around. The Furiten rule makes it extremely important to know what all of your weights are when you're in Tenpai. If you have a complex hand and you discard a tile that you don't recognize as one of your weights, you can put yourself in Furiten without even realizing it. Then later, if you go out off an opponent's discard that you do recognize as your weight, your opponents can still accuse you of violating Furiten. In addition to your win becoming invalid, violating Furiten also levies a penalty upon your score. Most video games will inform you when you're in Furiten, and not actually let you call ron if you attempt to. But it can still come as an unpleasant surprise if you're not paying attention. Now, that being said, there is a way you can use knowledge of the Furiten rule to your advantage. If you let your opponents call ron on your discards too often, you will see your supply of points very quickly diminished to nothing. But your opponents are all bound by the rule of Furiten just like you are. So you can help protect your score if you concentrate on the contents of their discard piles. If you're worried that one of your opponents might be close to completing their hand, you can be certain that they won't be able to call ron against you if you discard a tile that's already in their own discard pile. This is the primary element of defensive play. If it doesn't look like your own hand is going to come together, It's often a very good idea to forget about building your hand and instead focus on discarding tiles your opponents can't call. This is especially helpful if an opponent has declared reach, in which case you can watch not only their own discard pile, but also the tiles your other opponents discard safely from that point on. Of course, defending yourself from more than one opponent at a time in this manner can be problematic, to say the least. If you have to choose, it might be best to defend against the player in the lead, or at least against one you particularly don't like. After a hand has been completed and points have been exchanged, the game proceeds to the next hand. At this time, all of the players' seat wind assignments rotate one seat counterclockwise. The players do not physically move, only their seat winds move. The player who was sitting south becomes the dealer. The player who is sitting west is now south, and so on. There are circumstances which can temporarily halt the rotation of the seat winds, which I'll describe shortly. The hands in a round are counted by number, starting with hand 1. The hand number increases by 1 each time the seat winds rotate. It takes a minimum of 4 hands to be played in order for the seat winds to rotate all the way around the table, letting each player have the dealer seat at least once. After hand 4 has been played, the current round is over. If there's another round to be played, the hand number resets back to hand 1, and the round wind rotates. The game always starts in the east round, and for subsequent rounds the round wind rotates to south, west, north, and then back to east again, in the standard wind sequence. The dealer indicator should always indicate what the current round wind is, so flip it over to signal the start of the south round if you're playing one. Most Japanese mahjong sets do not have a dealer indicator for the west and north rounds, so if you're going to play more rounds, you may want to make your own dealer indicator with a west and north face on it to help indicate this, even if it's just a piece of paper. Continue playing hands until the number of rounds decided upon at the beginning of the game has passed. The player with the highest score at this point is declared the winner. In some rules, if a player loses enough points that their score becomes 0 or negative after a hand, the game ends immediately without the remaining hands needing to be played, and the player with the highest score wins. Other rules may allow the game to continue as normal with the player in a negative balance of points, meaning it is still possible for that player to make a comeback by the end of the game. In many rules, if the player who wins a hand is the dealer for the current hand, the seat winds do not rotate before the next hand. This situation is referred to as renchan, or sometimes dealer keep in English. Whenever a dealer keep occurs, each player retains their current seat wind for the start of the next hand, and the current hand number repeats. As long as the dealer keeps winning hands, dealer keep can continue to be invoked indefinitely. This remains true even if dealer keep occurs on the last hand of the last round in a game. In some rules, though, if the dealer is in the lead when a dealer keep would occur on the last hand, it is determined that no further dealer keeps are necessary, and the game ends. A hand can come to an end without any player ever declaring a win. If the player who draws the last tile from the wall does not call tsumo, and then discards a tile on which no other player calls ron, the hand is a drawn hand. In Japanese, this is called ryukyoku. If any players declared reach during the drawn hand, their 1,000-point bets remain on the table for the next hand. However, players are still required to pay another bet to the table in order to declare reach on the next hand. Gather the leftover 1,000-point sticks to the center of the table to keep them separated from the new reach bets. These points will remain on the table until a player does win a hand, at which time the winning player claims all points on the table. When a drawn hand occurs, the players that did not achieve tenpai during the hand are required to pay a fee to the players that did. This event is called no ten bappu, or no tenpai penalty. Starting with the dealer and proceeding counterclockwise, each player either reveals their hand and calls tenpai if they are in tenpai, or keeps their hand concealed and calls no ten, or no tenpai if they are not. Players that declared reach during the hand are required to reveal their hands to confirm that their reach was valid. Players that are in tenpai but did not reach may call tenpai, but they may also choose to call no ten if they wish. However, video games will usually call tenpai for you automatically. Once all the players have made their calls, the players that called no ten evenly split a 3,000-point deduction from their scores, and the players that called tenpai evenly split a payment of the same amount to their scores. This chart lays out all the possible combinations of costs and payments. If all 4 players make the same call, no points are exchanged. If the dealer calls tenpai during the no tenpai penalty, then a dealer keep takes place just as if the dealer had won the hand. There's no difference in the procedure following either type of dealer keep. Anytime a dealer keep or a drawn hand occurs, an extra 100-point stick is placed on the table to the dealer's right, just before the start of the next hand. This is called a bonus stick, or tsumibo in Japanese, and it indicates that the next hand to be played will have some bonus points at stake. If you're not playing with point sticks, you should use some other kind of marker to represent them. If dealer keeps or drawn hands occur over multiple hands consecutively, another bonus stick is added before each new hand, and the sticks accumulate. There is no limit to the number of bonus sticks that can be on the table. Each bonus stick increases the value of the next winning hand by 300 points. More details on that will be covered in the scoring section of the video. As soon as a non-dealer player wins a hand, all of the bonus sticks are removed from the table before the next hand. If you don't have any extra 100-point sticks, it is usually the dealer that volunteers the bonus sticks. However, the sticks are still considered to be part of your score. They only serve as a marker, and their points are not considered to be on the table in the same way as reach sticks. Sometimes you might see some translations of the rules describe the number of dealer keeps and the number of bonus sticks as being equivalent terms. This is just a little bit misleading though, because either a dealer keep or a drawn hand may contribute to the current accumulation of bonus sticks. However, only one bonus stick is added at a time after each hand, even if a dealer keep occurs at the same time as a drawn hand because the dealer was in tenpai. In an optional rule, during any hand in which there are 5 or more bonus sticks on the table, there is an additional requirement imposed in order for a hand to qualify as a winning hand. It must have at least 2 han. Furthermore, those 2 han must both be from yaku. Just 1 han from yaku and 1 han from dora is not enough. There are other situations that can result in a hand ending immediately without a winner being declared. However, what happens afterwards in these cases is a little different from what follows a regular drawn hand. To distinguish them, these hands may be called null hands, or aborted hands. The Japanese term for them is tochu ryukyoku, though they can also simply be called ryukyoku. If a null hand occurs, the no tenpai penalty procedure is not performed, the seat wins do not rotate, and the hand number does not change. In essence, the hand requires a total do-over. But just like a regular drawn hand, reach bets made during a null hand still remain on the table, and a bonus stick is added for the next hand. These are all of the different situations that can result in a null hand. Different rule sets can vary on the outcomes of these conditions. Some rules may not always call for a null hand in some of them. Other rules may change whether or not the seat wins rotate or a bonus stick is added. During the very first go-around of the game, if all 4 players discard a copy of the same wind tile, the hand immediately becomes null. If all 4 players declare reach during a single hand, and no one calls ron on the discard of the 4th player to reach, the hand becomes null. At this time, all 4 players are required to reveal their hands to confirm that they are in tenpai. If all 3 other players declare ron on one player's discard, the hand becomes null. The 3 calling players are required to reveal their hands to confirm the validity of their calls. If 2 or more players declare kan a total of 4 times during a single hand, and no one calls ron on the next discard of the player who formed the 4th quad, the hand becomes null. If the player calling the 4th kan has a complete hand after drawing from the dead wall, they may still call tsumo before the null hand is invoked. Remember that this rule only applies if the 4 quads are divided amongst 2 or more players. A single player is allowed to form 4 quads all of their own without the hand becoming null. However, at this point the dead wall will have run out of tiles to draw, so declaring kan is no longer possible. The implications of this are dependent upon the rules. Some rules prohibit any player from declaring kan for the rest of the hand. Other rules allow it, but immediately invoke a null hand if a player does declare kan for a 5th time. If a player's starting hand contains at least 9 different types of terminal tiles and honor tiles, that player may choose to reveal their hand on their first turn only before drawing a tile and declare the hand to be null immediately. This is called kyushu kyuhai, or 9 tiles, 9 types. There are infractions a player can commit during a hand that invoke a rule called chonbo, requiring the player to pay a severe penalty to the other players. The details of chonbo are covered in their own section. If chonbo occurs during a hand, the hand becomes null. Unlike other kinds of null hands and drawn hands, chonbo is the only instance in which players that declared reach during the hand are given their 1,000-point bets back. Only the reach bets that were placed on the table during the chonbo hand are returned. It can be helpful to know the Japanese naming conventions for the hands of a game, because you will likely hear or see them used in video games. The Japanese name of a hand always starts with the current round wind, ton, nan, sha, or pei. Then the number of the hand is given, followed by the word for hand, which is kyoku. From 1 to 4, the numbers are pronounced ikkyoku, nikyoku, sankyoku, yonkyoku. So the very first hand of a game is always called ton ikkyoku, and the 4th hand of the south round would be called nan yonkyoku. The last hand of the last round in a game is also called orasu, which is a contraction of the Japanese pronunciation of all last. There are a few different ways you can translate the hand names into English. Ton ikkyoku could be called East Round First Hand, or East Round 1, or East Hand 1, or you could just leave it untranslated, anything you prefer. Now, if there are any bonus sticks on the table at the beginning of a hand, their amount gets appended to the name of the hand. In Japanese, they're counted in units called honba. So if the first hand of the game was repeated with a bonus stick added, it would be called ton ikkyoku ipponba. You can translate ipponba as something like with 1 bonus stick. Or you may choose not to translate the term and just say ipponba or 1 honba. First bonus hand is another possible translation you may see. But be careful not to get confused, because consecutive bonus hands do not necessarily have to belong to the same hand number. Now, here's the procedure for calculating how many points a winning hand is worth. The actual math involved is not all that complex. The difficulty arises from all the tiny individual details that you have to remember. If you're playing a video game, scoring of hands will be taken care of for you automatically. If not, there are cheat sheets available that can help streamline the scoring process. At the very least, though, you need to know how to count the two basic components of your hand's score: Han and Fu. Han are the points you get from the yaku you have built into your winning hand. Each yaku in the game has a Han value between 1 and 6, a score based roughly on the relative difficulty of forming a hand that satisfies it. A hand must satisfy at least one yaku to be considered a winning hand, so it will always have at least one Han. However, if your hand meets the requirements of multiple yaku, every one of those yaku contributes its Han value to your hand's total, except for a few yaku that aren't allowed to combine with each other. In the yaku section of the video, I will describe in detail what each yaku is called, what your hand must do to satisfy it, and how much Han it's worth. Now, if you have any Dora tiles in your winning hand, this is the part where they help you out by adding extra Han to your total. Each copy of a Dora tile you have in your hand is worth 1 Han. If a tile counts as multiple Dora, it adds the same multiple of Han to your hand. Fu are a type of points awarded to your hand based on certain factors of the difficulty of the hand's composition. They are sometimes referred to as mini points. Every winning hand always starts with 20 Fu. Additional Fu can be added if your hand meets any of the following criteria. If the type of basic weight that completed your hand was a pair weight, edge weight, or closed weight, your hand gains 2 Fu. Two-sided weights and set weights are not worth any Fu. If you were in a combined weight, you must isolate the type of basic weight that the winning tile you called applies to. For example, going out on a double pair weight is worth 2 Fu even though you are weighting on multiple tiles, since either tile fulfills a single pair weight. If your hand's pair is a pair of dragon tiles, or a pair of wind tiles that match either the round wind or your current seat wind, your hand gains 2 Fu. In some rules, if the round wind and your seat wind are the same, the matching pair of wind tiles counts twice and you get 4 Fu. No other kind of pair is worth any Fu. If there are any sets in your hand, each set is worth some Fu. Sequences are worth no Fu. How many Fu you get for a set depends on whether it's open or closed, whether it's a triplet or quad, and whether the type of tile in the set is a terminal, honor, or simple tile. This table displays each type of set you can have and its value. There is actually a pattern to the values that may make the table easier to remember. All sets start out being worth 2 Fu. If the set is closed, the Fu is doubled. If the set is of any terminal or honor tile, the Fu is doubled. If the set is a quad, the Fu is quadrupled. In this way, the number of Fu a set is worth can be any power of 2 between 2 and 32. The table is filled in with the values from the 8 possible combinations of these factors. Count the Fu from each set in your hand, and add all of them to your total. If you went out off the wall by Tsumo, your hand gains 2 Fu. If you went out off an opponent by Ron, your hand gains 10 Fu if it is closed. If your hand is open, it still gains 10 Fu if it has not gained any other Fu from the preceding steps, and its total is still 20. With these 4 steps, all of your hand's Fu have been counted. Afterwards, it is always rounded up to the next multiple of 10. This is how it works most of the time, but there are some exceptions that apply to specific yaku. Those will be presented as they arise in the Yaku section of the video. Take the total amounts of Fu and Han your hand has been awarded, and substitute them into the following mathematical expression. Fu multiplied by 2 raised to the power of 2 plus Han. The result of this expression is referred to as your hand's basic points. Here's an example. Say a winning hand has 30 Fu and 4 Han. Using those values in this expression, you get 30 times 2 raised to the 6th power, which equals 30 times 64, which equals 1920 basic points. If your hand has 5 Han or more, you don't need to do the math and you don't need to count your hand's Fu. Your basic points are determined differently. As the number of Han in a hand continues to increase, the results of the basic point calculation can quickly become exceedingly large. To protect against this, at a certain threshold the calculation is skipped, and your hand is awarded a fixed limit of basic points based on its amount of Han alone. The limits start being applied when your hand's basic points would total more than 2,000. This is always the case if you have 5 Han, no matter how many Fu you have. But it is also guaranteed if you have 4 Han and at least 40 Fu, or 3 Han and at least 70 Fu. If your hand is in any of these situations, your basic points are capped at 2,000. This is called Mangan, a name which acts like a rank for your hand. Higher amounts of Han are worth greater fixed amounts of basic points, and each amount carries a different rank. If you have 6 or 7 Han, you receive an automatic 3,000 basic points, and your hand's rank is called Haneman. If you have between 8 and 10 Han, you get 4,000 basic points, and your hand is ranked Baiman. With 11 or 12 Han, you receive 6,000 basic points, and a rank of Sanbaiman. And once you hit 13 Han, your score cannot get any higher no matter how many more Han you add. You've reached the limit. From that point on, your hand's rank is called Kazoe Yakuman, and it's worth 8,000 basic points. No matter how your hand's basic points were calculated, the remaining steps in the scoring procedure are always the same. So now you know your hand's basic points. Depending on the circumstances of your victory, the other players will owe you some multiple of these basic points as payment to your score. Which players have to pay what multiples is determined by 2 things: whether you went out by tsumo or ron, and whether you are the dealer or not. If you went out on a tsumo, all 3 opposing players are required to pay to your score. If you are not the dealer, the player who is the dealer pays 2 times the basic points, and the other non-dealer players each pay 1 times the basic points. If you are the dealer, all 3 players pay you 2 times the basic points. If you went out by calling ron, only the player who discarded into your hand pays you, but they pay you much more. If you are not the dealer, you are owed 4 times your basic points. If you are the dealer, you're owed 6 times the basic points. After the multipliers have been applied, each individual player's payment is rounded up to the next multiple of 100 points. As an example of this step, take the earlier example's basic points of 1920, and suppose the winning player was not the dealer and went out on a tsumo. The 2 non-dealer players' payment is 1 times 1920, and this gets rounded up to 2,000. The dealer's payment is 2 times 1920, or 3840, which is rounded up to 3,900. So the winning player receives a total of 7,900 points from the losing players. Now suppose the winning player was the dealer, and went out on a ron. In this case, the discarding player's payment is 6 times 1920, or 11,520 points, which is rounded up to 11,600. There are scoring tables available like this one that you can use to immediately determine what the results of the preceding calculations will be once you've counted your hand's Fu and Han. The last step is to factor in the number of bonus sticks on the table. Each bonus stick adds an extra 300 points to the total value of a hand. On a tsumo, the extra cost is split evenly between the 3 losing players, so each player pays an extra 100 points times the number of bonus sticks. On a ron, the extra cost is borne entirely by the discarding player and becomes 300 times the number of bonus sticks. Building upon the previous example one more time, suppose that there are 2 bonus sticks on the table when the hand is won. In the case of the non-dealer tsumo, the payments for the other players become 2,200 and 4,100. In the case of the dealer ron, the discarding player's payment becomes 12,200. Scoring calculation is now complete. Each losing player's payment is subtracted from their score and added to the winning player's score. The players will exchange point sticks to represent this. At this time, any points on the table from reach bets are removed from the table and added to the winner's score. This includes all reach bets that remained on the table after a drawn hand or a null hand.